Message from Beyond the Grave, Devoured by Flies, a Queen Mary ghost, and many more coming your way in show number 246. Start things off with a story from Cassandra in the U.S. Baltimore Home. When I was a baby, we moved to a house outside of Baltimore. The prior owners did their own home improvements, so the house was a bit off. Flickering lights, switches that didn't always work, etc. It drove my mom crazy, but it made the little things that happened, like the TV turning itself off or on, easy to excuse. As a child, I had reoccurring nightmares. Once I had been awoken during a lightning storm to see what looked like something with a black goat face watching me from the window at night. And ever since then, I loathe to look outside the window at night. One night I went to the kitchen, and as I entered, I saw a can move across the kitchen counter. I remember thinking it was odd, but I just cautiously passed by to get water and went back to bed. Occasionally, things would move for no reason or just break suddenly. The radio volume or a TV channel would change on its own, but it was the only home we knew, so what can you do? After I moved to college, I would visit home, but things felt different. It felt as if something was in my room, so I would sleep on the couch to avoid it. We had a half-finished basement that was cold and unused. The stairs to it were very long, 2 flights with a landing in between. At the top of the stairs, there was a closed door. On one visit, I was using the treadmill down there, when suddenly, crack! I turned in shock and saw the doorknob from the top of the stairs bounce back several feet from the basement wall. There was no way a doorknob could hit the wall at that height without being thrown. The air felt very heavy. With warning, I stopped the treadmill and cautiously went upstairs. Not long after that, my parents sold the house. Story number 2. After college, I moved into a nice studio apartment. Every Wednesday, I went dancing and stayed out very late. One night, I came home and saw an orb in my bathroom. It was a white, translucent glow. It seemed like it was just a trick of the eyes, so I blinked and slowly tilted my head to the left, then to the right, staring at it. It didn't move. I backed up and tried again. The orb did not change its position. It stayed exactly where it was, in its space, without moving. It was real. Deciding this was too much for me, I slowly backed away, closed the door to the bathroom, and went to bed. I didn't drink alcohol at the time, so I was not able to write this off as an hallucination. This story is from Jose in Washington. Devoured by Flies. For almost 10 years, I lived in a house in Tacoma, Washington, with my mom and some bandmates. I played drums in a band that is still around. My mom would occasionally tell me about strange feelings she would get around the home when she was alone. Noises, things falling in the kitchen, or even one time, someone knocked on the back door and was begging for help. When she went to answer, nobody was there. The really weird part came later, when a passerby told her a story about the house. A man told her that he was impressed by the state of the house and that it used to be in very bad shape prior to us moving in. He told her that many years ago, an older woman and her teenage daughter lived there. The woman had health issues and stayed home often. Eventually, her health got really bad, and she needed near constant care. Apparently, the daughter had started neglecting her mom and her needs, being she was too busy and doing her own thing. The woman ended up dying in her house. When the authorities finally went in to perform a welfare check, they found stacks of magazines and newspapers all over the house, and the woman lying on her bed, decomposing and covered in flies. My band would go on and make a song called Devoured by Flies, which they still play today, in her honor, and probably because it sounded really metal. It must have been a terrible death. But this explains all the strange things that have happened in that house, and even strange dreams I've had throughout the years when I lived there. I still drive by the house once in a while, and think about the great memories with my band, but also wonder about the woman who died in such a miserable and lonely way. We can only hope that this woman is in a better place, seeing herself as she used to be, healthy, and without a care in the world. P.S. The bedroom she died in was my mother's bedroom. This is a story from Alan in California. The Field.
Hi, Lex. This story takes place in Central California in the mid-1980s. I grew up down the street from my good buddy Steve, who to this day is still my closest friend. Directly across the street from Steve's house was a vacant lot. And we didn't think it was strange back then, but looking back, it is fairly odd for a well-established, older neighborhood with fully grown trees and families to have a vacant lot right in the middle. But there was, and we loved it. We named it The Field, and that's where we would play every afternoon and every Saturday morning. Steve and I would go out to the field with our army clothes and our toy guns, and we would build forts and dig holes, and that was our spot. Most of the other kids in the neighborhood were older than us, and they never came near the field. They all referred to it as the haunted field. Steve's bedroom window had a clear view of the field, and he said he never saw anybody out there except for occasionally a little blonde kid would be running around out there, but neither of us knew him, and he never messed with our fort or any of our stuff, so we pretty much had that lot all to ourselves. There was a fairly large pile of wood scraps and rubble in the far corner of the field that Steve's dad would not allow us to play in, and he warned us many times that there were rusty nails and black widows and all sorts of things in there, and to stay away from it. And we did. But not because of what Steve's dad told us. We were afraid of that big pile of wood because of what the neighborhood kids had said. They told us that that was where the ghost lived. And the story was that if you went out to that field just before the sun came up, you would see the ghost climb out of the pile of rubble and hop on its one leg down the street. And that terrified us. So we stayed away from that pile of wood, and we stayed away from that side of the field. One morning I packed up my toy guns and put on my army clothes like usual and walked over to the field, and Steve said he had talked to the little blonde kid that morning, and the kid had told him that a house was going to be built there soon, and that his dad drove the Bobcat tractor for the construction company that was going to be building the house. The idea of a house being built there was devastating to the both of us, and we started basically counting down the days until we didn't have our field anymore. Steve told his parents what the kid had told him, and his dad suggested that we go in there and get all of our toys out of there before construction begins. And we did, and we were sad to do it. But the day had come where we cleared out all of our stuff and we said goodbye to the field. But then a week went by and no signs of any construction had started. Another week went by, and nothing had happened. I suggested that we just go back out there and take all of our stuff and start playing in the field again. But Steve told me he saw the little blonde kid again, and he had told him the same thing. He said his dad and the crew were going to be out there the next day to start building the house. Still, nothing happened. Months went by, turned into years, and Steve and I both grew older and got into middle school, and that field just became a part of our past. And it wasn't until I believe I was a senior in high school when I drove by the field one day and I saw a construction crew. So I got out of my car. I was feeling a little nostalgic, and I was walking around there, take one last look at it. And I was talking to one of the construction workers and telling him about how I used to play out there and pointing out to areas of where our forts were and whatnot. And I asked him, I said, don't you think it's a little strange that for all these years in a neighborhood like this that there would be this empty lot sitting here? And he told me the reason why a house was never built here was because of the tragedy that happened 25 or 30 years ago. And I will never forget the feeling of the cold chills that ran through my body when he said that. I have them right now. He said that a house was being built on that lot when the neighborhood was new. And a little boy used to come to work with his father. And one day there was an accident, and the little kid lost his leg and bled to death in that field. Construction was put to a halt. All the building materials were thrown into a pile and left in the corner of the field, and nobody ever came back. And that was the reason why nobody wanted to build on that lot for all of those years.
Anything Ghost has been serving up people's personal ghost stories since January of 2006. That's over 12 years of Anything Ghost. And if you'd like to get your ears on that complete archive of Anything Ghost, plus much more, you need to join the Anything Ghost VIP group. For more information, go to anythingghost.com and then go to the Join the VIP Group tab. anythingghost.com, join the VIP Group tab for 12 years of Anything Ghost. Stories from JJ in Los Angeles, California. Message from Beyond the Grave. Both my sister and I had a great relationship with our mother, who passed away unexpectedly in 2012. There are a couple things that are pertinent to this story that I would like to relay. When I moved to LA right after college, I was short on money. A lot of the time, I would eat cheap burritos from Mexican fast food places almost every day. My mom was amused and probably a little worried by this and made a lot of jokes about it. The second thing worth noting is that my mom was an immigrant and that English was not her native language. She was a very smart lady, but she never became a perfect speller in English. In 2011, my now wife and I got jobs teaching English for a year in Paris. This, of course, proved to be a big dietary change for me. There were very few places in France that attempted to make burritos, and the ones that did were pretty bad. Every once in a while, I'd post them on Facebook. It was a running gag. In January of 2012, my dad called me to say that my mom, who had fallen ill, was in intensive care, and it looked pretty bad. I flew back to the States to see her, and she passed away shortly after I reached the hospital. This was, of course, devastating for me and my father and sister, and I stayed back for a while, returning to France to finish out my contract. Classes there ended in June, and my girlfriend and I moved back to the U.S., but I had to stop off in New Mexico, where my girlfriend was from, to pick up some items I had stored at her parents' house. While there, I took the opportunity to go out and have an authentic Mexican-American burrito. It was my first one in nearly a year. I went to a really good Mexican restaurant, ordered a burrito, and naturally took a picture of it. Thinking of all the bad burritos I'd had in France, I wrote as a caption, "Now this is what I call a burrito. 7,000 calories of goodness." I thought nothing of it, as it was just another dumb post for my friend's amusement on Facebook. A few people liked my burrito picture, and a couple of my friends replied with the usual silly comments. A third commenter, however, shocked me, because it was my mom. My mom, who, keep in mind, had passed away 5 months prior, commented on my post. "How about burritos a la French you ate in Paris?" She spelled burritos incorrectly, with one R, which is exactly as she would have misspelled it. The fact that I got a Facebook comment from my deceased mom stunned me, and I just could not believe it. I thought it must have been my dad or my sister, but neither of them are practical jokers whatsoever. My dad is completely tech-averse, so I nonetheless thought it must have been my sister, even though that didn't make sense. I copied and pasted the post with my mom's comment in an email to my sister, and my sister answered writing about it. I know this goes against all scientific thinking, but I feel in my heart that Mom somehow connected with you. If someone had logged into her account, her comment on your photo would have shown up as recent activity on her wall. But I just looked, and there wasn't any activity on her wall since her birthday. Also, the comment she made is totally in her style of humor. Hard for someone else to duplicate that. Finally, she commented on a burrito, and she'd always make funny comments to me about all the burritos you ate. I think she wants you to know that she is with you and still laughing at your burritos. My sister added, "God, I miss her, and I'm so jealous too, because she is connected with you and Dad, but not yet with me." I never asked her what she meant by my dad, but I never asked my dad for specifics either. I was too freaked out. I ended up just pretending the whole thing never happened and willfully forgot about it for the past going 6 years. However, I was recently reminded about it when my sister told me that her daughter speaks to her dead grandmother, my mom, sometimes. My sister doesn't make things up or even remotely exaggerate things. It is all so weird. I'm afraid to ask more about it. I still can't accept that my mom sent me a Facebook message from beyond the grave, or that the dead might actually have the ability to contact the living. I guess it's comforting, but it upends my entire belief system. This is the only paranormal experience I've ever had in my life. I would like to know if there are some Anything Ghost listeners who have had similar experiences of being contacted by deceased loved ones through Facebook or anything like that. This is from Jonelle in the U.S. Ghost Ruins Party. My best friend and I were having a sleepover when we were about 13 or 14. We thought it would be fun to sleep in my parents' RV that was parked in our fenced backyard. So my dad ran an extension cord from the garage to power it up. We plugged in a CD player for some music and settled in. We decided that this would be a perfect time to try to automatic write and use a Ouija board. The automatic writing was a bust, so we switched to the Ouija board and started asking the standard questions like, "Anyone there? Who are you?" We got an answer, though 15 years later, neither of us can remember exactly what it was, but it transitioned us into starting to be sarcastic and taunting the board. That's when the CD player that we were listening to turned off, along with the rest of the power to the RV. We ran into the house and told my dad, who went to check it out. The lights in the garage that were powering the RV were on, and the extension cord was still plugged in, so he couldn't find any reason why the power would have been out. We slept in the house that night. I had a few experiences in that house, and my parents had actually seen an apparition. Sometimes I would be hanging out in my room and would suddenly feel a presence. I'd scream as a reflex, and the feeling would be gone. Other times, I'd be lying on the bottom of my bunk bed, reading a book, and would feel water splash on my face. In the middle of the night one night, both my mom and dad saw a man standing by a closet in their bedroom. Of all things, he was wearing a very retro powder blue tuxedo and ruffled shirt. Thinking back on it, both of us believed that it may have been the spirit that ruined our party in the RV that night. And a story from Nancy in Lombard, Illinois, Chicago fireman. Once, when I was about 7 years old, I heard my father leaving early for work. I was half asleep, and he came into my room and kissed me on the head goodbye. I sort of woke up, and he was walking out, and I wanted to run and give him a big hug. He was a Chicago fireman, and I was always worried about him. So I got up to run to catch him, and was stopped by the sight of something that looked to me to be the Grim Reaper. As soon as I saw it, it floated down my hallway and out the door. I was so scared I ran to my bed and pulled the covers over my head, and I never saw it again. I called my dad at the firehouse later that day to make sure he was okay. He was fine. He had a great career, saved lives, and is still going, although retired now. Second, I was on my way to John Edwards' show. He is the psychic medium that talks to dead people. My mother-in-law's sister, Mary, had just passed away suddenly from pneumonia. She was taken to the emergency room, but was dead within 24 hours. She was only in her early 50s. My mother-in-law took it very hard. She's from Ireland, and one of 12 children, and was particularly close with Mary. While I was sitting in the parking garage before going into the show, I paused and called out to Mary and asked her, even if she didn't come through, to please somehow let me know she was okay. Suddenly, my car lights started flashing, my horn started beeping, and this went on for a good minute. No matter what I did, it would not stop. I started the car, I hit the alarm button. Nothing worked. Then it just stopped. I smiled, and I knew she was okay. My mother-in-law was very happy. And this is a story from Lauren in Northeast New Jersey. Acupuncture ghost. I receive acupuncture therapy regularly. The office that I visit is a suite within a larger complex and contains 5 small rooms that fit a massage table and not much else. Up until this point, I was always assigned to the first room. However, on one particular day, that room was occupied, so I was led down to a room at the far end of the hall. The hall was an L shape, with one room beyond the corner. The massage table in the room was positioned feet facing the door, and the head facing the far wall. As the session began, I laid my face down, while the acupuncturist silently went about her routine of prepping with essential oils before applying the needles. After this, she turned the lights out and left me in total relaxation for 20 minutes. During this time, I usually drift off into a light sleep. I'd been lying there maybe 10 minutes when I suddenly heard the door to my room open and shut. This startled me a bit, as I hadn't been left alone for very long. I felt a presence in the room, and though my eyes were shut, I could almost see someone passing just above my head, in the space between the table and the faint glow from underneath the window shade. I was feeling a bit uneasy, because I didn't know why my acupuncturist would be back in the room with me, because I could tell she was not working on me. That was when I felt, or heard, a breath in my right ear, as if someone put their mouth right next to it and gently exhaled. In the very next moment, I was jolted from my state of rest, and my entire body immediately tensed up. Now my senses were on high alert, and my mind wandered in confusion, searching for any plausible reason as to why my acupuncturist would disturb my session. But I could feel it, this presence, as if someone were sitting in a chair at the foot just to the right of me, in some state of observance. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity as I lay completely still, eyes shut tight, noticing every creak in the walls, feeling every little inconsistency in the airflow. I tried to free my mind of fear and open myself to receiving a message of some sort, but nothing ever came. Before my time there finally ended, my acupuncturist opened the door and asked, "How you doing in here? Relaxed? Wasn't sure if you were feeling a bit antsy." This was an odd thing for her to do, cut my session so short, so I wondered if she knew somehow. I didn't let on to anything, just said that I was fine, but was ready to wrap it up. I was not at all ready to talk about it that night, but at my next visit, I asked her why she had checked up on me. She said she could just feel some sort of shift in the energy. Then I described my experience to her, and she told me that other patients had had similar encounters in that same room and requested to be moved. She also told me of a woman who was a bit of a clairvoyant, had spoken of a man she's seen standing at the end of the hall, right outside that room. When the clairvoyant described the man, my acupuncturist thought it strongly resembled her grandfather. I don't know much else about the history with him, but she thinks he's been trying to contact her, but she has asked him not to disturb her clients. She now sages the office on a regular basis, and I have yet to have another occurrence. Probably because I prefer not to go to that room anymore. But whenever I'm there, I still try to keep my mind open to any messages from beyond. Here's a story from Philip in Tucson, Arizona. Child ghost in photo. During the first week of February, my folks adopted a dog from a local pound. Once they brought the dog home, they wanted to send a picture of it to my siblings and myself. My parents are retirees, and my siblings and I all live in different places. So my folks went outside to their backyard to take a couple of pictures. My mom sat on a patio chair and held the dog in her lap, and my dad attempted to take the picture. Unfortunately, my dad is a Luddite, and somehow put the phone in selfie mode, and shot a quick video of himself trying to fiddle with the camera. My dad finally figured out the photo thing, and took a few pictures, and they went inside. It wasn't until they were reviewing the pictures that they noticed something perplexing. When they played back the video, a person walks directly behind my dad. Here's the thing. There's no ethereal quality to the person. Besides a bizarre gait, it's just an obvious person. You can hear footsteps before it even comes into view. It all looks matter of fact. But there is no way anyone else was there. Like I said, my folks are retirees and live alone. The video was shot in my parents' backyard, and it's surrounded by a large brick wall. It's not like it's pedestrian. Even if there was a person, my mom, as well as the dog, would have seen the person, because they were sitting in the chair facing my dad. They didn't see a thing. My dad almost deleted the video without watching it, but luckily he decided to give it a once-over. Hopefully one of your listeners can help us better understand what is in the video and why it's there. And it is a pretty creepy video. I viewed it myself. It looks like a child, and they're walking like within inches of his father's back. But I'll post the link to the YouTube video on anythingghost.com along with this episode. And if you're a VIP group listener and you're listening to this as an early release, I'll also have it there in the VIP section. This story is from Shelley in Garland, Texas. Smile for me. One night in 1997, I was watching a movie with my grandma and great-grandma in the living room. I decided I wanted to grab a toy from my room across the house. So I got up and walked toward the hallway and stopped dead in my tracks as I saw Grandma's room door open and a tall man walk out of it. I mean, he was so tall, he actually had to bend down to exit the room. He looked like what I guess would be called the Shadow Man. No features, but just eyes. And he looked over at me what felt like was a long time. I got a weird feeling and I just wanted to throw up or scream. He finally turned away, opened my grandma's door, and just walked in. I ran away crying. I told my grandmother what had happened, which they didn't believe, so I just left it alone. Fast forward to my 20s. I was asleep one night and just having the worst nightmare. I saw that man when I was little, and he was standing over me pulling out my teeth. That dream was so scary it actually woke me up. I sat up in bed, just shaking in shock. I was looking around the room to get my bearings, and that's when I saw it. The man sitting on my dresser. This time he looked different. He had the biggest grin. I was just staring at him, not able to move. Looking at me, he hopped down from the dresser, walked over to the edge of my bed, and said, "Smile for me." I still live in that home, and I still have those nightmares, and sometimes my boyfriend has to wake me up because I'm crying out and thrashing around so hard in my sleep that I have even punched the wall. I don't know who or what that man is, but he's not a good man. If anyone has experienced something like this, or knows who that man may be, I would love to know, and how to deal with him. That's a story from Mike in Wichita, Kansas. Great Grandpa's Christmas. My family is from Northeast Delaware, to be exact. This is the start of our story. My family is from Northeast Delaware. This story goes back to when my mother was a young girl. Her grandfather had just passed away a few weeks before Christmas. It was 2 days before Christmas, and the family was gathering at the grandma's house. It was getting late, so the adults sent my mother to bed in her grandmother's bed. She awoke in the middle of the night to a sound that she could only describe as mice walking on and going through paper. She felt a cold chill in the room, even though the space heater was close to her feet. She could not sleep all night because she felt like someone was in the room. Eventually, she got up very early in the morning, went downstairs and told her grandma, who was sleeping on the couch, about her experience. Her grandma took her back up to the bedroom and showed her something under the bed. It was Christmas presents. She had wrapped the gifts for her grandpa, and then she put them under the bed. She hid them there because he was a Christmas present nut. He would always look for and want to open any presents early. Did my mom's grandpa make a visit and try to open presents under the bed while my mom slept? A story from Haley in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Grandma in the basement. In the early weeks of November 2017, my grandmother passed away after over a year of declining health. She had been living in a nearby assisted living facility and was surrounded by her children and grandchildren as she passed from this world to the next. I held her hand as she took her last breath, a moment that was both relieving and utterly disturbing, a memory I will never forget. As we all shuffled home, depressed and grieving for our loss, we settled down for the night. the weighing occurrence of the day hanging all over us. As I lay down in my bed, the darkness surrounding me, I began to worry that my grandma's spirit would be lingering around the house. I had always been extremely interested in the afterlife, loving ghost stories and thoughts of specters roaming the earth, although I never wanted to witness anything paranormal myself. To my surprise, I fell asleep and slept soundly through the night, and with the preparation of the funeral over the next week, I largely forgot about such concerns. Several days passed, and soon many family members began to head home after the funeral, leaving just my dad, mom, and little sister seated at the breakfast table one morning a week after the death. My sister was telling us how she had been sitting in the living room the day before and was annoyed by the sound of a very loud clicking clock coming from the corner of the room where a large pile of things from my grandma's room had been stacked up by my uncles. They had just finished cleaning out her living space at the assisted living facility a couple days prior. She said she had gotten up from her seat on the couch, going to find the sources of the annoying noise. She quickly found a small alarm clock that had sat on my grandma's bedside table, not only while she was living at the facility, but also for years before she was living on her own in her home. My dad had felt very nostalgic about the little clock, and he made sure that it wasn't lost in the mass of cleaning her room after her death. Grabbing the clock, my sister was instantly shocked to find the very loudly ticking thing was battery-powered, and in turning it over, found there were no batteries in it, and yet it still ticked. My dad eyed us all hesitantly as he listened to my sister's story. When I asked him what was wrong, he finally told me something that had happened to my uncle the night my grandmother passed away. He was tentative to tell us, as he knew I was skittish about such things. He said that he had woke in the middle of the night around 3 a.m. to use the restroom. He had been sleeping in our basement. He used the restroom and had left the door open. After he was finished and turned to exit the bathroom, he came face to face with my grandmother. He saw her only for a moment, but it was enough of a glance to see that the woman who stood before him was not that of an airy figure, more specter than person, but rather real flesh and blood. It was like she was really standing before him. She said nothing, just stared at him. He quickly did a double take, and when he looked back, she had vanished. Nothing ever did happen after that in our house. For that I was grateful. However, my uncle often called for weeks afterwards to simply say, "I think Mom followed me home." And we're going to end show number 246 with a self-narrated story. And it's from Annie in New Jersey. And she has more experiences to share about the paranormal from being a house painter.
Hi, Lex and listeners. This is Annie calling from New Jersey with some more stories. I called in some stories last year. I think it was episode 235. And I have an update to one story and some more stories for you. As you'll remember, I'm a house painter, and a lot of my clients have ghost stories, so they tell them to me so I can send them on to you. And the story I have an update on, the last time I told you about one of my clients, Harry and Sandy, who had activity in their house. The strangest episode being they got up in the middle of the night and found their kitchen sink was full of broken glass. And to this day, that was about 30 years ago, and to this day they still have no idea where that glass came from. And so there was nothing really malicious, it was just odd things happening. And when I sent the story to Lex, he said it sounded more like a poltergeist, and asked how old the client's daughter was when it was happening. So I contacted her, and Sure enough, their daughter was an adolescent when it was going on, so maybe it was a poltergeist. So the last thing that happened when they were in that house, they moved out at the end of 2009, and the last night that they spent there, the husband told the ghost, well, we're moving to a new house tomorrow, but if you want to come with us, you're welcome to come with us. And nothing happened, but the next night, which was the first night in the new house, 3 o'clock in the morning on the dot, the doorbell rang. And when they ran to answer it, there was nobody there. So Sandy said, well, I guess you just let the ghost in. So for 8 years, nothing has happened in their new house. But last fall, they said some things did start happening. The first thing that happened several times is the TV started going haywire, where the channels would start changing, and they actually have the TV on almost 24/7. If they're awake, then the TV is on. But it's only happening when they're actually sitting and watching it that the TV will suddenly start changing channels on its own. And she said one thing it does keep doing, they're watching a show, the screen will change to the local channel, it's like channel 2, where it's just a blue screen and you see, the weather and the date and the time and whatever, but they can still hear the show that they were watching. So of course they called the cable guy to come in, and he couldn't find anything strange, and it happens intermittently. Harry said, well, if we're going to be haunted, we might as well give the ghost a name. And just at random, he named the ghost Jerome. And when Sandy told me the name, she didn't say it out loud. She spelled it for me, because she said whenever they say the name out loud, things start happening. So I don't know if the ghost either doesn't like their name or if they inadvertently got it right, but so they try not to say the name. A couple other things have happened. They have a water heater that's back in the utility room way at the end of the hallway. And Sandy said one day she was sitting in the living room watching TV and heard this huge crash. And she didn't really want to go see what it was, but the cats were staring down the hall. And when she did go down and look, the water heater has I think it's a dehumidifier attached to it, and that had just fallen off and crashed to the floor. And it's a pretty big, heavy thing. I think it's like the size of a window air conditioner, and that so obviously made a huge noise. And when she had a guy come to repair it and hang it back up, he said he's never seen one of these come off ever, and he couldn't see any reason why it just fell off. But at their last house, if you remember the story I told you last year, they had a problem with their heater quite a few times. So when she told this repairman, he got very nervous and fixed the job really quickly and got the heck out of there. So that was, those things are kind of, could just be coincidences, just things going crazy. But the last thing is, I think, is kind of scary. They have a dog who's a pointer, and their daughter has 2 other dogs that are also pointers. So they have doggy parties, and they have sleepovers. So the daughter will drop off her 2 dogs, and the 3 of the dogs hang out together. And so all 3 dogs have been in that house for years. Nothing unusual has ever happened until just after the TV started going crazy. The one dog, his name is Champ, and he's the most laid-back dog. He's just happy to lay on the sofa all day and have his belly rubbed. He doesn't get hyper, he doesn't bark at anything. They woke up in the middle of the night. He was cowering under the kitchen table, howling and looking right at something that they could not see. And they said they've never seen him do that ever. He was absolutely terrified. And the other dogs were running around, but it was hard to tell if they saw it too or if they were just upset by what he was doing. So they made an exception. The dogs were not usually allowed in the bedroom, but they let him go in there that night, and Champ went directly under their bed and wouldn't come out for the rest of the night. And the next day he was fine, but they said it's happened 3 or 4 times in a few months. and it's just very disconcerting, and the poor baby is just terrified, and they don't see any pattern of when it's happening. So that's that. That's the only things that have been going on there. If I get any more stories from them, I'll certainly pass them on to you. I do have another story from another client who also lives in my hometown. This is Bob and Mike, and they live in a house that was built in 1963. They've lived there for about 20 years. But before that, before 1963, there had been a farmhouse there for about 100 years. And our town's pretty old, so where the house was used to be on the edge of town, but now it's kind of in the middle of town. And they said as soon as they moved in, Mike immediately said, "There's an old woman in this house." He said he would see her every now and then. And Bob didn't see anything. He was like, I don't know what you're talking about. But Bob's father came over and immediately said, there's an old woman living in your house. So he and Mike described her, and it was definitely the same woman. And they said, she's not angry or anything, and she's just there, and she's aware that they are there. She's watching them. Since then, like I said, it's been 20 years, and every once in a while when they have guests over, somebody will say, your house is haunted. And they'll either feel somebody brushing past them, or they'll feel somebody in the room. They had a dinner party recently, and one of their guests said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but do you know you have a ghost in your house? And one of the other guests said, I am so glad you said that. You see her too, right? And they said she was in the corner of the room, just this old woman, just sitting there watching. She wasn't angry or trying to get rid of them. She was just hanging out with them. And I think the only time Bob said he's never seen her, but one time he was coming down the stairs and he felt a cold air all of a sudden, and there was no windows open, there was no air, vents there, and he said, I guess I just met the ghost. And they actually know who it is. I wish I could remember her name. It's an Italian name, of course, in my town. Everybody's Italian. But they do have a friend who grew up on that street. And she, in 1963, when the house was torn down, she was about 10 years old. And her mother told her and her siblings they're going to tear down the house on the corner and build a new house. And they all said, well, where's the old lady going to go? And their mother said, what are you talking about? That house has been abandoned for years. Nobody lives there. And they all insisted that they would always see an old woman looking out the window. And they all described her the same way. And when she told this to Mike, he said, okay, and what did she look like? And it's definitely the same woman that he's seen in the house. So they know who it is, and I think it's interesting because obviously it's not a residual. She's not walking through walls that aren't there and going upstairs that aren't there anymore, and she is aware that they are there. And in fact, she's stealing things from them. They have had, over the years, random things have disappeared. A red tablecloth, a cheap blender. They had a doll that it's not an antique, but it looked like an antique. That's gone. And in 20 years, they've looked all over the house. They have never been able to find those things. It's not like they found it in a closet or an attic. Like, they have never found any of these things ever again. The only thing that did come back was one of their cats. And Bob works, has an office in the house. And this one cat is always near him while he's working all day. And one day they said, where's the cat? They couldn't find him all over the house. And finally, at the end of the day, before they went to bed, the cat showed up, really angry. The cat was not happy. So they're guessing that she tried to take the cat, and the cat wasn't having it. But so I thought that was funny. So yeah, apparently she's just happy to be there. I thought it was interesting that she's in their house, even though it's not the house that she lived in. But she seems to be happy with them there, and just wants to keep living. So anyway, that is the last of my stories for right now. You never know. I work in some old houses. I've got a house coming up that I'm going to start in. The woman died in the house a couple of years ago, and the house is exactly the same as it was when she died. It has all of her clothes in the house and all of her tchotchkes everywhere. So, and they all agreed if anybody's going to haunt a house, it's Julie. So if I get haunted by Julie, I'll let you know. But for now, that's it for me, and talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.
Yeah, that's from Annie, our paranormal house painter. And Annie, if you have any other experiences, please send them in, including those that you may experience with Julie. All right, everybody, that's it for Anything Ghost Show number 246. Collecting stories for show number 247. If you have a ghost experience, personal ghost experience you would like to share, send it to Lex@anythingghost.com or go to anythingghost.com and fill out the form there.